She wasn't the kind of woman who turned heads in boardrooms. She wasn't built like the decorative wives who floated through charity galas on the arms of men like Dorian Ashford. Women whose collarbones caught the light like architecture, whose silence was a performance, whose presence in a room was designed to be felt before they were seen. Ingrid Solveig was none of those things, and she had made a quiet, careful peace with that fact somewhere around her 29th birthday, sitting alone in her car in a parkade in downtown Vancouver, eating a butter chicken wrap because the office kitchen felt too public. She was thick through the hips and soft through the middle, the kind of woman who wore dark cardigans as armor and kept her hair in a braid because a braid didn't ask anything of her. She had a laugh that was too loud when she forgot herself, and she always forgot herself eventually. She kept the books for Ashford Group Holdings. That was the official title. What it meant in practice was that Ingrid Solveig sat in a glass-walled office on the 14th floor of a building on West Georgia Street, and made sure that a very large amount of money moved through a very complicated series of accounts in a way that would survive any scrutiny from any direction. She was good at it. She was, if anyone had cared to notice, exceptional at it. The kind of accountant who could spot a discrepancy buried 6 layers deep in a shell company's quarterly filing the way other people spotted typos. Nobody noticed. That was the arrangement, and it suited her fine. Dorian Ashford noticed very little about Ingrid Solveig in the 2 years she'd worked for him. He noticed when the numbers were wrong, which they never were. He noticed when reports were late, which they never were. He did not notice the way she went still when he walked into the room. He did not notice that she memorized his coffee order, his signature style, short, slanted, final, or the fact that she had once stayed until 2 in the morning to prepare a presentation he'd forgotten to mention was needed by 7 a.m. He didn't know about the 2 a.m. part. Nobody did. Dorian Ashford, the man the financial pages called a visionary, and the men in certain back rooms called something else entirely, walked through her office the way most people walked through lobbies. He saw furniture. He saw function. He did not see Ingrid. This was fine. This was completely fine. She had told herself this so many times that it had stopped sounding like a lie and started sounding like weather. Just a fact. Just the temperature outside. It was a Thursday in October when everything quietly came apart. The evening had not been planned as anything significant. Ingrid's friend Josie had bought 2 tickets to a fundraiser dinner at the Fairmont, and then come down with a chest cold so severe she was running a fever and losing her voice simultaneously, and she had called Ingrid at 4:30 in the afternoon with a raspy, guilt-laden plea. "You have to go," Josie said. "I already paid. It's for the children's hospital. You love the children's hospital. I've never expressed a strong opinion about the children's hospital. Ingrid, I am dying. Go to the dinner." The dress she wore was the one she'd bought 2 years ago for a wedding she'd almost not attended. It was the color of deep water, a kind of blue-green that shifted depending on where the light hit, and it wrapped around her in a way that, on a good day, made her feel like herself. Not a smaller version of herself. Not an apologized version. Just herself. She looked in the mirror for a long time before she left the apartment. She made herself stand there and not look away. The fundraiser was the kind of event where tables cost $12,000, and the salmon was overcooked, and everyone smiled at everyone else with their teeth while conducting separate and unrelated assessments of net worth. Ingrid had been seated beside a man named Elliot, a civil engineer from Kelowna, in Vancouver for a conference, genuinely kind in the way that people from smaller cities sometimes are, with no performance in it. He asked her about her work and actually listened to the answer. He refilled her water glass without being asked. He had laugh lines around his eyes and a slight sunburn on his nose, and he was, by every reasonable metric, a perfectly pleasant person to spend an evening beside. Ingrid was cautiously beginning to enjoy herself. She had just said something that made Elliot laugh, something about the particular absurdity of triple-entry bookkeeping, when she felt it. The shift in the room's air pressure. She had worked for Dorian Ashford for 2 years. She knew the particular quality of silence that preceded him, the way conversations briefly recalibrated, the way people sat up slightly straighter without meaning to. She did not turn around. She kept her eyes on Elliot and kept the expression on her face completely neutral, and reached for her wine glass with a hand she willed to be steady. Ingrid, his voice, right behind her. She turned slowly, the way you turn when you've known something was coming, and have had approximately 12 seconds to compose yourself. Dorian Ashford stood 3 feet away from her table, and he was not smiling, and he was looking at her in a way she had genuinely never seen him look at her before. He was looking at her the way he looked at problems. "Mr. Ashford," she said. Her voice was even. She was professionally proud of how even it was. "I didn't know you'd be here," he said. "Josie was ill. I took her ticket." His gaze moved, briefly, measurably, to Elliot. Back to her. "This is Elliot," Elliot offered pleasantly, extending a hand. "Elliot Marsh. And you are?" There was a pause. Not a long one, but the kind that has texture. "Dorian Ashford," he said, and he shook the offered hand without looking away from Ingrid. "Great event," Elliot said. "Do you know Ingrid from work?" "She works for me," Dorian said. Something in the way he said it was technically accurate and somehow entirely wrong. It was the phrasing of a man making a point, though Ingrid couldn't have said precisely what point he thought he was making. "Has for 2 years." Elliot smiled. "She's been telling me about the accounting work. Sharp mind." Another pause, this one longer. "Yes," Dorian said. "She is." Ingrid became very focused on the base of her wine glass. "I'll let you get back to your evening," he said. But he didn't move immediately, and the not moving was somehow the most communicative thing he'd done. Then he turned and walked back toward the far side of the room, and Ingrid exhaled for the first time in what felt like 90 seconds. Elliot glanced at her with mild curiosity. "Intense guy. He's yes." She reached for her wine. "He has a lot going on." What she didn't say, she had never in 2 years heard Dorian Ashford describe her to another person as anything. She was invisible in his professional narration. The books balanced, the reports appeared, the discrepancies dissolved, and none of it had an author as far as anyone in that world was concerned. "She works for me." 3 words. She knew it was nothing. She also knew she was going to be turning those 3 words over in her head for the next 72 hours minimum, which was embarrassing and also completely beyond her control. She excused herself just before dessert to find the washroom, which was down a long corridor past the coatroom and around a corner. The hotel had that quality of deep quiet that expensive places curate deliberately. Thick carpet, low lighting. The sense that time moved at a different rate here than it did outside. She was coming back down the corridor when she nearly walked directly into Dorian Ashford's chest. She stopped. He stopped. They were alone in the corridor. "Sorry," she said on reflex. "Don't." His voice was quieter here, stripped of the polished register he used in meetings. "You have nothing to apologize for." She looked at him. He was looking at her with that same expression. The one she didn't have a name for, the one that felt like being calculated, except not coldly, like being counted, like being looked at carefully enough to finally be seen. "Is there something you needed, Mr. Ashford?" she asked professionally, calmly. "Dorian," he said. She blinked. In 2 years he had never corrected her. She'd called him Mr. Ashford, because that's what his PA called him, because that's what everyone called him, because using his first name had always felt like presuming something. "Ingrid," he said. The way he said her name, not her surname, her name like it was a thing he'd been holding in his mouth for a while, made her chest do something inconvenient. "How long have you worked for me?" 2 years, she said. 2 years in November. "I know your work," he said. "I want you to know that. Better than you think I do." She held very still. "The Mercier account in February," he said. "You caught a filing error that would have cost us $400,000 and potentially our operating license in Quebec. You said nothing about it. You fixed it, filed the amended return, and never mentioned it to anyone." She hadn't known he knew about that. "You work late most Thursdays," he continued. "You drink your coffee black in the morning and add milk in the afternoon, which I find logistically unusual. You have a laugh that carries, which you suppress when you think people are listening. You're the most competent person I have employed in 15 years of employing competent people, and I have handled that fact atrociously." Ingrid stared at him. "Is this a performance review?" she said. Her voice was admirably steady, considering. Something shifted in his face. It was very nearly a smile. Not quite, but approaching. "It's something I should have said 2 years ago. Said more specifically," she said. "I notice you, Ingrid." He said it simply, plainly, like it was a fact he'd been trying to get to for a long time. "I notice you considerably more than I've indicated, and I realized tonight, watching you laugh at someone else's joke in that dress, that I had been profoundly careless with that." The corridor was very quiet. Her heart was conducting itself completely without her permission. "You realize," she said carefully, "that this is a deeply unusual conversation to have with your accountant in a hotel corridor. I'm aware." He paused. I'm also aware that your date is a civil engineer from Kelowna who will leave the city on Sunday and probably send you a polite text a week later that neither of you will pursue. That's," she opened her mouth, closed it, "extremely presumptuous. Is it wrong? A beat?" "No," she admitted. "But that's not the point." "What is the point?" She looked at him for a long moment, at the way he was standing, at the fact that Dorian Ashford, who presided over board meetings like sentencing hearings, was standing in a hotel corridor with something genuinely uncertain in his expression. She had worked for him for 2 years. She had made herself invisible, made herself easy, made herself the kind of employee who solved problems before they became problems, and never once asked to be seen doing it. She thought about the parkade and the butter chicken wrap and the dark cardigans and all the quiet work of making herself manageable. "You had 2 years," she said. "I know. You had 2 years to say any of this. I know," he said again. And there was no defense in it, no deflection, just the plain weight of it, which somehow made it worse and better simultaneously. "I need to think," she said. "Of course. I'm going back to the table. Of course." She moved past him, and she was very nearly at the turn in the corridor when he said quietly behind her, "For what it's worth, the dress, I noticed." Immediately. She walked around the corner. She stood against the wall for approximately 15 seconds, doing nothing. Then she fixed her expression and went back to the table and talked to Elliot about bridge infrastructure for the remainder of the dinner and did not look across the room once. She looked across the room once. In the lobby afterward, while Elliot went to retrieve his coat, Ingrid stood by the revolving door and became aware that Dorian was standing 20 feet behind her. She knew without looking. She had always known where he was in a room. That wasn't new. What was new was the knowledge that it went the other way, that it had always gone the other way. He didn't approach. He just stood there in that way he had, the way that made the air around him feel deliberate. She said goodbye to Elliot, warmly, genuinely, and shook his hand and meant every bit of goodwill she expressed, because he was a perfectly good person who had done nothing wrong in this or any scenario. The hotel door revolved, and the October air came in cold and clean, smelling of rain on concrete, the particular Vancouver smell she'd grown up with and had never found a word for except home. She stood on the steps. Behind her, she heard the door again. "The offer stands," Dorian said, beside her now, not touching her, looking out at Burrard Street and the headlights moving through the dark. "Dinner. Some time that I actually plan in advance and ask properly." "You'd have to ask properly," she said. "I know, and give me time to think, as much as you need." She looked at him sideways. He was looking at the street, jaw set, hands in his coat pockets, and he looked, for the first time in 2 years, like a man who was not entirely certain of the outcome of something and was still choosing to stand there anyway. Ingrid Solvay had spent 2 years making herself easy to overlook. She decided, extremely tired of that. "Thursday," she said, "not this Thursday, the one after." He turned to look at her. "I'll need the address in advance," she continued, "and a start time. I don't do vague. You've never once done vague," he said, and this time it was a smile, real and unguarded and startling in how much it changed his face. She looked at that smile for a moment. "Good night, Mr. Ashford," she said. He let the name stand. "Good night, Ingrid." She walked down the steps and flagged a cab and did not let herself look back, and the city moved around her in its usual Friday night way. Lit windows, wet pavement, strangers walking fast under umbrellas, and she sat in the back seat of the cab with her hands folded in her lap and allowed herself quietly and with full awareness to feel every single thing she'd spent 2 years carefully not feeling. The dress was the color of deep water. She had stood in front of the mirror and made herself stay, and he had noticed immediately